So we're going to look at 6 business models with possible local context. And when we say local context, we mean predominantly South Africa and maybe other emerging markets as well, but we'll focus on South Africa for the purpose of this conversation. In that, we're going to look at 6 interesting models that I think have got a lot of application locally and some that are very much underutilized as well. So we talk about a subscription model, product to service, freemium, micro-franchising, cooperative ownership, and product on demand. So the first one we talk about is subscription models. So these are not unusual in certain sectors. So this is typically where a customer pays a reoccurring fee. It's usually a monthly fee or an annual fee to gain ongoing access to a product or a service. And that model is typically because the cost of that is very high, and they lower the barrier to entry by making it a recurring fee. So typically, if you join a gym, you could never really afford to kit out a full service gym in your home. You probably wouldn't have the space, you probably wouldn't have the time or the expertise to do that, so you pay for that service on a monthly basis. Other more recent services like YouCook are where you are able to actually get a full service set of meals delivered to your home from a fully fitted kitchen, and you do that on a subscription basis. And typically, where maybe it's not that you don't necessarily can't afford to do it, but you certainly don't necessarily have the time to be able to kind of put that all together. So these are all kind of really clever ways of actually giving a much larger number of people access to something that they really want, but they may not actually have been able to get their hands on. And I think in the insurance sector, there's a lot of opportunity specifically in this space. And if we move on to the next one, we talk about product as a service. We're really talking about consumers paying for the service that the product provides, but without the actual burden of having to carry that product. So if I'm typically looking at something like, the old saying around, if I'm buying a hammer, what am I buying? Am I buying the hammer? Or am I buying the ability to put a hole in the wall with a nail? So a good example of that is Hilti. So Hilti is a industrial tool company. They make kind of the most famous piece of equipment is where you do these pop rivets into the wall and other industrial equipment, but they're typically found on building sites. So these are very expensive drills and industrial for industrial use. And these pieces of equipment cost a lot of money. Now, typically, you're only using this maybe 1 hour a day, and the rest of that time it's lying around, so they typically get damaged, they're expensive, and so on and so forth. So what Hilti did a number of years ago is it pivoted its business model away from actually giving away or selling the product to selling the service. So their model moved to say, no, we'll give you this particular product, and you'll never own the product, but we'll provide you with a full service to deliver what you want. So if the product is damaged or it gets broken, we'll swap it out, and we'll give you the uptime you're looking for. Probably not probably well known, but the world's most famous example of this is Rolls-Royce, and that's Rolls-Royce engines. So in the majority of airplanes that you see out there, or they're up in the sky, they're actually all carrying Rolls-Royce engines. And those engines are not owned by the airline, or even by the airline manufacturer. They're owned by Rolls-Royce. And they will basically provide that service to say, we'll give you the engines to fly your airplane, we'll guarantee the uptime, we'll guarantee the fact that they will function, and we'll manage the repairs. And so that sort of idea of paying for that service helps a lot of businesses move forward. Incidentally, Hilti's profitability jumped about 30% after it shifted to this particular model, which has now become quite a common thing. If we start to look at the freemium based model, so a freemium model is where I give away a portion of my proprietary product or service for free, and then I charge a premium for advanced functionality or additional features. So this is a classic digital product conversion funnel model where I give you something for free, I get you using my product or service, I try and entice you in, and then I move you on to a premium model. Now, Deezer, which is a music streaming service, does this extremely well. It offers you a really good service at no cost, but it's got these annoying little ads. And eventually it says, well, maybe if for every 100 people that use the free service, maybe between 5 and 7 of those will convert. And for those customers, they get a much better service, they get the premium service, and those conversion metrics become quite clear over time, and you can build a fairly solid business around it. Solar City, which is Elon Musk's big investment in fitting out homes in North America with solar, did a very, very similar process. I think one of my favorites is this idea of microfranchising. So microfranchising is when I take the basic concept of traditional franchising, but I specifically focus in on creating those opportunities in a much, much smaller scale. So people want what they want. So a good example is Nescafe, is these small little sachets of Nescafe, or Panado, or washing powder, or washing soap, or even butter. So you go from maybe a 50 milligram or milliliter packet all the way down to a 5 milliliter packet, and you sell, and people then sort of buy those things on a daily basis. Safaricom did very similar in the early days with airtime. So they sold you airtime in these really small bundles so that you could actually afford to get your hands on that particular product. Now, microfranchising is really selling the bigger product in smaller portions. If you look at sectors like the insurance industry, that's actually starting to happen now, where you see almost a pay-as-you-use model. So I want the service, I want insurance for my car or for my good, but I don't want to, if I'm only using a particular, like my bicycle, 1 day a month, I don't want to pay for the other 30 days. Cooperative ownership, which is another popular one, specifically in emerging markets, where the company is owned and managed by members and stakeholders, and they pull together a cooperative people to deliver and use a certain good. So John Deere, who are manufacturers of large-scale agricultural equipment like tractors and harvesters, they caught onto this quite early. So when they came into new markets, they could see, well, really the farmer can't afford the equipment, but a cooperative farmers, a group of people, could come together and could lease or buy that. And in fact, they have financial models where they actually help cooperatives set up so they can purchase the equipment, and then those cooperatives can then share that equipment out between themselves and then rent it out to other farmers as well. One of my favorites in this category is something called Little Sun. So Little Sun is a very different kind of cooperative ownership model. Little Sun is a beautifully designed solar light that is sold at a sort of cost plus model to kids and families in North America and Northern Europe, and it's sold then at a cost less model to maybe lesser off families in places like Rwanda, where it's very popular, and Uganda. And both parties understand they're part of the same cooperative model. So when families and children buy this in maybe more developed countries, they understand I'm buying this at a slight premium, so it allows another child who maybe doesn't have electricity at nighttime to be able to buy that same product at a much cheaper price, and they're very happy to do so. I think one of the other critical ones, which is becoming more interesting and is a really interesting one in the startup space, is something called product on demand. So product on demand is where I'll only actually start producing the product when I see some demand. So a great example of that is Kickstarter. So Kickstarter, you can put up your campaign, you can put up your idea, and it's a really good test, because if enough people like your product, there is this sense that it's going to be successful, or at least has the opportunity to be successful because it sells out. And typically companies that don't succeed on Kickstarter, quite wisely, don't go into full production. There is nothing more sad than seeing an entrepreneur invest a lot of money into a product or a service and really only understand 6-12 months afterwards, when they've sunk their capital and they've spent their money, that there really wasn't the demand for the thing that they thought was good in the first place, and they lose. Where in Kickstarter, basic prototype, good video, you're up, you're running, and then the market gives you rapid feedback as to whether this is a good idea or not, and if you hit your funding target, you proceed. Another example of that locally in Johannesburg is a great design firm called Dr. and Mrs. They will sometimes make limited or design limited edition items, and when there's enough demand for that, they'll actually make the full range. And if there isn't, they just sell it off as a small run. So there we go. So there's a couple of very, very simple models that you can start to think about and really start to apply that to your innovation projects and your innovation thinking in slightly different ways.